The box arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, a crisp white cube tied with a festive red ribbon. Inside were the Christmas cards, 200 of them, custom-made, thick cardstock, with a photograph my mother-in-law Margaret had spent a small fortune on. My 6-year-old daughter, Mia, saw the box and her eyes lit up. "Are those the pictures, Mommy? The ones from the big house?" "They are, sweetie," I said, smiling at her excitement. The photo shoot 2 weeks ago had been the highlight of her month. She had been so thrilled to be included in a big family picture with all her cousins, aunts, and uncles. She had worn her favorite red velvet dress and had, in her typical bubbly fashion, wiggled her way right to the front and center of the group, plopping down on the floor before anyone could stop her. She had beamed at the camera, a picture of pure, unadulterated joy. "Can we see? Please?" she begged, bouncing on the balls of her feet. "Of course." I slit the ribbon with a pair of scissors and lifted the lid. The top card was turned over, showing a message in elegant script, "Wishing you a joyous holiday season from the Miller family." I picked it up and turned it over. The photograph was beautiful, professionally lit, capturing the whole family arranged in front of the grand fireplace in Margaret's living room. Everyone was smiling, dressed in coordinating shades of cream and gold. It looked perfect, a perfect family. But my blood ran cold. Something was wrong. I stared at the photo, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. There was my husband, Daniel, standing behind his mother. There were his siblings, their spouses, their children. There was the big, plush rug in front of the fireplace, but the center of the rug, the spot where my daughter had been sitting, was empty. Mia was gone. She hadn't just been moved to the back. She had been erased, digitally, expertly removed, as if she had never been there at all. The pattern of the rug was seamless. The shadows were perfect. It was a flawless, brutal act of deletion. "Oh, look!" Mia cried, grabbing the card from my numb fingers. Her little face was alight with excitement. She stared at the photo, her eyes scanning for her own smiling face. I watched as her excitement slowly, cruelly drained away. Her smile faltered. Her eyes darted back and forth, searching. "Mommy?" she whispered, her voice suddenly small. "Where am I?" She looked from the card to my face, her bottom lip beginning to tremble. "I was sitting right there," she said, her little finger pointing to the empty space on the rug. "I remember. The man with the camera said I was his best smiler." Tears welled up in her big brown eyes. "Why am I not there, Mommy?" she asked, her voice breaking into a sob. "Why don't I belong?" The question shattered my heart into a million pieces. I dropped to my knees and pulled her into my arms, holding her tight as she cried, her small body shaking with a grief too big for a 6-year-old to understand. She wasn't just sad about a picture. She was asking if she had a place in this family, in this world, and this beautiful, expensive, cruel piece of paper had told her that she did not. I held her, rocking her gently, my own tears silently tracing paths down my cheeks. But underneath the heartbreak, underneath the sorrow for my sweet girl, something else was happening. The fire of a mother's rage, cold and silent and absolute, was beginning to burn. This was Margaret's doing. I knew it as surely as I knew my own name. This was her message, sent on a $200 a box card, to me and to the world. My daughter, my beautiful adopted daughter, was not a real part of her perfect family. She was an imperfection to be erased. I held Mia until her sobs quieted into exhausted hiccups. I carried her upstairs and tucked her into bed, her tear-stained face finally peaceful in sleep. Then I went back downstairs. I looked at the perfect, hateful card still lying on the table. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw the box against the wall. I just stood there in the quiet house, and I took action. The next morning, when my mother-in-law unwrapped her present, her face would drain of all color, and she would finally understand what it felt like to be erased. The empty space on that Christmas card was not an isolated incident. It was the culmination of a quiet, cold war Margaret had been waging against my daughter since the day we brought her home. Daniel and I had tried for years to have a child. We went through endless tests, heartbreaking disappointments, and a grief that settled deep in our bones. Our marriage, which had been so full of laughter, became quiet and sad. Then, one day, we started talking about adoption. The moment we made the decision, it was like the sun came out from behind the clouds. The hope came back. The day we met Mia at the foster agency is a memory etched into my soul. She was a tiny, shy 4-year-old with big, curious eyes and a smile that was hiding just beneath the surface. She was clutching a worn-out stuffed elephant. I sat on the floor with her and started telling her a story about a brave little elephant who went on an adventure. By the end of the story, she was leaning against my side, and she had put her small hand in mine. I knew in that instant that I was her mother. Daniel was just as smitten. He loved Mia with a fierce, gentle heart. Our home, once quiet with sadness, was now filled with the sound of a child's laughter. We were finally a family. But from the very beginning, Daniel's mother, Margaret, made her disapproval clear. She was a woman who cared about 2 things above all else: appearances and bloodlines. She was the matriarch of a wealthy, established family, and she saw our decision to adopt not as an act of love, but as a disruption to her perfect lineage. She never said anything directly, of course. Margaret's cruelty was always wrapped in a thin veneer of politeness. At the first big family gathering after Mia came home, a barbecue at Margaret's sprawling estate, she handed out gifts to all her other grandchildren, expensive toys and designer clothes. She had forgotten to get something for Mia. "Oh dear," she'd said with a dismissive wave of her hand. It completely slipped my mind. "Daniel, be a dear and let her play with one of her cousin's new toys." She made Mia sound like a visiting charity case. As Mia grew, Margaret's comments became more pointed. She would look at Mia's beautiful dark brown eyes and say things like, "It's a shame she doesn't have the Miller blue eyes. They've been in our family for generations." She would talk endlessly about her other grandchildren, her real bloodline, emphasizing their inherited traits, their resemblance to one ancestor or another, all while Mia was sitting right there. Every time I would see the flicker of confusion and hurt in Mia's eyes, and every time Daniel would make excuses for his mother. "She doesn't mean it like that, Anna," he would say later in the car on the way home. "She's from a different generation. She just needs time to adjust." "Time to adjust?" I'd argue, my voice tight with anger. "Daniel, it's been 2 years. Mia is our daughter. She is her granddaughter. There is nothing to adjust to." But Daniel was terrified of his mother. He had grown up under her iron will, and even as a grown man, he was incapable of confronting her. He would agree with me in private, but in his mother's presence, he would fall silent, his loyalty divided, his courage failing him. He thought his passive love was enough to protect Mia, but he was wrong. His silence was a form of permission. It told his mother that her behavior was acceptable. I tried to shield Mia as best I could. I showered her with love, told her every day how special and wanted she was. I wrote and illustrated children's books for her, stories where the bravest heroes and the cleverest princesses looked just like her. I tried to build a world for her so full of love that Margaret's coldness couldn't penetrate it. But children are perceptive. They see the subtle shifts in tone, the glances, the omissions. Mia knew, on some level, that her grandmother didn't see her the same way she saw her cousins. The photo shoot, the Christmas card. It was just Margaret's quiet war escalating into a public declaration. She had finally found a way to make her feelings clear, to edit my daughter out of the family picture, literally. And in doing so, she had finally pushed a patient, quiet woman too far. She had hurt my child, and that was a mistake she would come to regret. The family photo shoot was Margaret's idea, of course. Everything was. She announced it at Sunday dinner a month before Christmas. "We simply must have a proper family portrait for the Christmas cards this year," she had declared, as if it were a royal decree. "I'll be hiring a professional photographer and booking the club. I expect everyone to be there. No excuses." She wanted to project an image of a perfect, unified, and prosperous family. It was all about the optics. The reality of our family, the tensions, the resentments, the quiet cruelties, was to be cropped out. The day of the shoot was as tense as I had expected. We all gathered at the grand, old country club that the Millers had belonged to for generations. The photographer, a harried-looking man with kind eyes, was trying his best to wrangle the large group. But Margaret was the true director of the show. "No, no, no," she'd say, waving her hand dismissively. "William, you're too tall to stand there. You're blocking the portrait of my great-grandfather. Daniel, stand closer to me, and for heaven's sake, tuck in your shirt." She arranged and rearranged us like chess pieces on a board. When it came time to place Mia, she pointed to the very back row. "The little one can stand back here behind her cousin James." Mia's face fell. She had been so excited, her red velvet dress a bright splash of color in the sea of muted creams and golds Margaret had dictated we all wear. "But Grandma," Mia said, her voice small, "I won't be able to see the camera from back there." "Nonsense, dear," Margaret said without looking at her. "You'll be fine." I felt a surge of anger. She was literally trying to hide my daughter. I was about to step in to insist that Mia be moved, but then Mia did something that was so perfectly her. She didn't argue, she didn't cry, she just took matters into her own hands. With the determination only a 6-year-old can possess, she wriggled her way through the forest of adult legs, popped out at the front of the group, and plopped herself down on the floor, right in the center of the plush oriental rug. She smoothed down her velvet dress, folded her hands in her lap, and beamed up at the photographer. "I'm ready now," she announced. A few of the cousins giggled. Daniel shot me a panicked look, a silent plea for me to control our daughter. But I just smiled. I wasn't going to be the one to crush that joyful, defiant spirit. The photographer, charmed, laughed. "Well, hello there. I think we've found our star." He knelt down to her level. "You've got the most important spot, you know, right in the front." Mia's smile grew even wider. Margaret was furious. I could see it in the tight line of her mouth, the dangerous glint in her eye. But she was trapped. To make a scene now, to physically drag a smiling 6-year-old out of the center of the family portrait, would shatter the very image of perfect family harmony she was trying to create. It would be unseemly. So she said nothing. She just gave a tight, thin smile and allowed the photographer to proceed. He took dozens of shots, and in every single one, there was Mia, the joyful, bright red centerpiece in a bland sea of beige. She was the heart of the photo. She was the thing your eye was drawn to. She was, as the photographer had said, the star. After the main group shots were done, the photographer took smaller family portraits. When it was our turn, me, Daniel, and Mia, he captured a beautiful photo of us, with Mia laughing in Daniel's arms. "You'll want a copy of this one," he said to me with a warm smile. "It's a keeper." As we were packing up to leave, I saw Margaret pull the photographer aside. She spoke to him in a low, urgent voice, her hand on his arm. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but I saw her slip a folded envelope into his hand. He looked uncomfortable, but he nodded. "I'll be in touch regarding some final edits to the photos," I heard her say as I walked past. At the time, I thought she was just being her usual controlling self, probably wanting him to smooth out some wrinkles on her dress or brighten her smile. I never imagined the truth. I never imagined that the final edit she was commissioning was the complete and utter erasure of my child. The night the Christmas cards arrived was the longest night of my life. After I finally got Mia to sleep, her tear-stained face peaceful against her pillow, I went back downstairs. The house was silent, but my mind was screaming. I picked up one of the hateful cards, the image of my smiling family with a Mia-shaped hole in the middle, and I felt a rage so cold and so clear it was almost peaceful. My first instinct was to call Margaret and unleash a torrent of fury. My second was to wake up Daniel and demand that he finally, for once in his life, stand up to his mother. But I did neither. Screaming would accomplish nothing. It would just give Margaret the satisfaction of knowing she had hurt me. And Daniel. Daniel would be horrified, yes, but he would also be paralyzed. He would wring his hands and talk about how we needed to handle this delicately. There was nothing delicate about this. This was a declaration of war against my child. And in this war, I was the only soldier she had. I walked into my art studio, the small, light-filled room at the back of the house where I wrote and illustrated my children's books. This was my sanctuary, my place of creation. Tonight, it would become my war room. I didn't throw things. I didn't cry anymore. I took out a fresh, thick sheet of watercolor paper, the kind I used for my final book illustrations. I taped it to my drafting table, took a deep breath, and picked up a pencil. My hands, which had been trembling with rage just moments before, were now perfectly steady. My mind, which had been a chaotic storm of pain and anger, was now laser-focused. I was going to do the only thing I knew how to do. I was going to tell a story. I started to sketch. The image that emerged under my pencil was of a little girl with big, curious eyes and a bright, joyful smile. It was Mia. I drew her sitting on a plush rug in front of a grand fireplace, her red dress a splash of vibrant life in the center of the page. Then I began to draw the family around her. I drew a grandmother with a tight, thin smile and cold eyes. I drew a father who looked away, his face a mask of conflict. I drew aunts and uncles and cousins, all smiling, but their smiles didn't reach their eyes. They were all looking past the little girl, as if she wasn't there. I worked all night. The story poured out of me, simple, direct, and true. Once upon a time, in a big, grand house, lived a family who looked perfect on the outside. One day, a little girl with eyes like chocolate and a smile like the sun came to join them. She was so happy to have a family. She loved her new mommy and daddy, and she wanted to love her new grandma and cousins, too. I wrote about how the little girl tried so hard to belong, how she learned all the family's songs and games, but the grandma's heart was cold. She didn't like that the little girl's eyes weren't blue like hers. She didn't like that the little girl's hair wasn't blonde like hers. The little girl was different, and the grandma didn't like different. The climax of the story was the grand family picture. I painted a beautiful, detailed illustration of the whole family, just like the photograph. And there, in the center, was the little girl, the heart of the picture. Then, on the next page, I painted the same picture again. But this time, the little girl was gone. There was just an empty space on the rug where she had been. The family was still smiling their perfect empty smiles. The final page was just text, written in a simple, childlike font. The little girl looked at the picture and asked her mommy, "Why did they make me disappear? Don't I belong?" And her mommy held her tight and said, "You belong more than any of them, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never, ever forget that." By the time the sun came up, I was finished. I looked at the pages spread out on my desk. It was the most painful and the most honest story I had ever written. I had a title for it: The Girl Who Disappeared. This was not just a story, it was a weapon, and I knew exactly how I was going to use it. Margaret had sent her message on a Christmas card. I was going to send mine in a hardcover book. The next morning, I didn't tell Daniel what I had done. When he finally saw the Christmas card, his reaction was exactly what I had predicted. He was horrified, his face pale with shock. "Oh, Anna, no, she didn't." He paced the kitchen, running his hands through his hair. This is monstrous. I'll call her. I'll demand she recall them, that she apologizes." But I knew he wouldn't. He would call her. His voice would tremble. She would steamroll him with excuses and justifications, and he would hang up, defeated. I couldn't rely on him. This was my battle to fight. "Don't," I said, my voice calm. "Don't call her. Let me handle this." He looked at me, surprised by my quiet resolve. He saw something in my eyes he hadn't seen before, and for once, he didn't argue. He just nodded. As a best-selling children's book author, I had a few advantages. One of them was a very close relationship with my publisher and my editor, a wonderful woman named Susan. I also had a clause in my contract that allowed me to commission small, private print runs of my work for personal use. I called Susan that morning. "Susan," I said, "I have an emergency project. It's personal. It's a new book, and I need a small, private run of 200 hardcover copies, and I need them by the end of the week. She was taken aback by the urgency, but she heard the steel in my voice. "Send me the files, Anna. I'll see what I can do." I spent the next hour scanning my illustrations and laying out the book on my computer. I designed it to look exactly like one of my published works, with a beautiful glossy cover featuring the illustration of Mia sitting alone on the rug, the ghostly outlines of the smiling family barely visible behind her. The title, "The Girl Who Disappeared," was printed in a simple, elegant font. I sent the files to Susan. She called me back an hour later, her voice thick with emotion. "Anna, I just read it. Oh my goodness. I have no words." She paused. "Don't you worry, I'll call our specialty printer myself. You'll have these books. I'll make sure of it." While the books were being printed, I began the next phase of my plan. I needed the guest list. Margaret's Christmas card list was her most prized possession, a carefully curated index of every important person in her social and professional circle. I knew she kept a copy on the desktop of the family computer in her home office. Getting it was surprisingly easy. I called her, my voice full of fake, tearful panic. "Margaret," I cried, "Daniel is so upset about the cards. He's threatening to cut ties. I think you need to talk to him. He's on his way over to you right now." It was a lie, of course. Daniel was at work, but it worked perfectly. Margaret, terrified of losing control over her son, rushed to prepare for his arrival. While she was busy downstairs, I used the excuse that I needed to pick up a toy Mia had left there. I let myself in, went straight to her office, and in less than 30 seconds, I had copied the entire list onto a small USB drive. It contained the names and addresses of 200 of the city's most influential people. The books arrived on Friday, delivered in discreet brown boxes. They were perfect. The quality was stunning, the colors rich, the illustrations heartbreakingly clear. Each book was a beautiful, painful little balm. I spent the entire weekend preparing the packages. For each of the 200 names on Margaret's list, I wrote a short personal note on my own elegant stationery. "Dear name, you recently received a Christmas card from the Miller family. I am writing to you today to share a small story that I wrote for my daughter, Mia, to help her understand why she was not included in the family photograph. I believe stories have the power to reveal the truth. Wishing you a season filled with kindness. Anna Miller." Into each envelope, I placed the signed note, a hardcover copy of The Girl Who Disappeared. And one more thing. I had gone to the photographer, the kind man from the photo shoot. I told him what had happened. He was horrified and deeply apologetic. He gave me the original, unedited digital file of the main family portrait. I had 200 beautiful 8x10 glossy prints made. In each package, right inside the front cover of the book, I placed the real photograph. The one with Mia, front and center, her red dress a beacon of joy. Her smile so bright it could light up the world. I mailed all 200 packages on Monday morning. They were scheduled to arrive just before Christmas. Margaret had sent her message. Now, my reply was on its way. Christmas morning at the Miller estate was always a production. It was less a family gathering and more a carefully staged performance of wealth and tradition. The tree was always enormous, professionally decorated, and surrounded by a mountain of presents wrapped in coordinated, expensive paper. The air smelled of pine needles and Margaret's disapproval. This year, the tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. When we arrived, Daniel, Mia, and I, the usual chorus of festive greetings was replaced by a strained silence. My husband's aunts, uncles, and cousins all avoided my gaze. They had clearly been given their marching orders by Margaret. We were to be treated with a cold, polite distance. They were closing ranks around their matriarch. Mia, bless her heart, was trying her best. She clung to my hand, her usual bubbly energy replaced by a quiet watchfulness. She had her new Christmas dress on, another red velvet one I had bought her, a silent act of defiance. Margaret was sitting in her usual armchair by the fireplace, a queen on her throne. She looked at us as we entered, her eyes cold and hard. She didn't stand up. "Daniel, Anna," she said, her voice clipped. "You're late." "Merry Christmas, Mom," Daniel said, his voice weak. The gift exchange began. It was a parade of extravagant, impersonal presents. Cashmere sweaters, expensive watches, designer handbags. Margaret handed out her gifts with a flourish, each one a reminder of her financial power. When she handed a gift to Mia, a small, poorly wrapped box, she did it without a word, her eyes fixed on some distant point over Mia's head. Mia opened it. It was a generic coloring book and a pack of crayons, the kind you buy at a gas station. It was a deliberate, final insult. Mia just looked at it, then looked at me and gave a small, sad shrug. My heart ached for her, but I just squeezed her hand. The main event was yet to come. Finally, after all the other presents had been opened, it was time. "This one is for you, Margaret," I said, my voice clear and calm in the quiet room. I walked forward and handed her a single, beautifully wrapped present. It was heavy, the size and shape of a large coffee table book. She took it from me, a condescending smile playing on her lips. "Oh, Anna, you shouldn't have," she said, her tone implying that whatever was inside was surely inadequate. "I do hope it's not another one of your little projects." "I think you'll find it interesting," I said. The entire family watched as she began to unwrap it. She tore at the paper with an air of regal impatience. She pulled back the final layer of gold foil wrapping, and then she froze. Her smile vanished. The color drained from her face, leaving it a pasty, sickly white. Her hands, holding the book, began to tremble. She was staring at the cover, at the beautiful, heartbreaking illustration of a little girl in a red dress, sitting alone. She was staring at the title, "The Girl Who Disappeared." A confused murmur went through the room. Her sister, Aunt Carol, leaned over. "What is it, Margaret?" "What did she give you?" Margaret didn't answer. She couldn't. She just sat there, her mouth slightly open, her eyes wide with a dawning, horrified comprehension. She had just unwrapped a mirror, and it was showing her a monster. The performance was over. The real show was about to begin. With trembling hands, Margaret opened the book. The room was silent except for the crackling of the fire and the rustle of the thick, glossy pages. The family, their curiosity piqued by her strange reaction, began to gather around her chair, peering over her shoulder. She turned the first page. There was the illustration of the happy little girl arriving at the big, grand house. She turned another, the little girl trying to learn the family's games, while the other children looked away. Page by page, the simple, devastating story unfolded. I watched their faces. I saw Daniel's brother, Uncle Robert, flinch in recognition at the illustration of the grandmother pointing out that the little girl's eyes weren't blue. I saw his cousins shift uncomfortably at the drawing of the children, leaving the little girl out of their games. They were seeing their own small, casual cruelties reflected back at them in the innocent, undeniable language of a children's book. Then Margaret got to the center of the book, the 2-page spread of the family portrait, with Mia, bright and joyful, right in the middle. A soft gasp came from one of my nieces, and then the next page, the same portrait, but with the empty space on the rug. The girl, gone. Margaret's breath hitched. She slammed the book shut as if it had burned her hands. "What is the meaning of this?" she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "What is this? This poison?" "It's a story, Margaret," I said, my voice calm and steady. "The story of what you did to my daughter." "You think this will accomplish anything?" she sneered, her composure starting to crack. "A silly little book? No one will ever see it." "Oh, I think they will," I said. "In fact, I think they're probably seeing it right now." A confused silence fell over the room. "You see," I explained, "I thought your friends, the 200 people on your Christmas card list, might enjoy a holiday story. So I sent each of them a copy, a special, limited edition. It should have arrived in yesterday's mail." The color that had drained from Margaret's face was replaced by a blotchy, furious red. The rest of the family stared at me, their mouths agape. "But that's not all," I continued, my voice never rising. I was worried the story might be confusing without the proper context, so I included a little something to help them understand. I walked over to the large, beautifully wrapped box I had placed by the door when we arrived. I opened it. Inside were dozens of copies of the original, unedited 8/8/10 photograph from the photo shoot, the one with Mia, front and center, her smile lighting up the entire frame. I took one out and held it up for them all to see. "I included one of these in every package," I said, along with a personal note explaining that this was the original photo and that the book was a story to help my daughter understand why her grandmother chose to erase her. The full scope of what I had done finally hit them. It wasn't just a family drama anymore. I had taken Margaret's cruelty and held it up to the light for her entire social circle to see. The bankers, the lawyers, the society wives, the charity board members, all of them, at that very moment, were looking at the evidence of her monstrous act. They were holding the beautiful photo of the smiling little girl and the heartbreaking book that explained her disappearance. Margaret's reputation, the thing she valued more than anything, the currency she had built her entire life around, was being systematically destroyed. She was not the elegant, powerful matriarch. She was the villain in a children's story. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a hatred so pure it was breathtaking. But she was speechless. There was nothing she could say. I had used her own tools, image, presentation, and a carefully curated mailing list, against her. I put the photograph down. I walked over to Mia, who had been watching the whole thing with wide, uncomprehending eyes. I knelt down in front of her. "Come on, sweetie," I said softly, taking her hand. "Let's go home." I stood up and, without a backward glance at the ruins of their Christmas morning, I led my daughter out of that cold, grand house. We walked out into the bright, crisp snow of Christmas Day, a mother and a daughter, a family of two. And our love was the only story that mattered.